Radinkan was 10 years old, and the doctor had pronounced his professional opinion that the boy would not live for another 5 seconds. The doctor was silky and pretty worthless, and counted for little, but his opinion was endorsed by Mr. The Rock, who counted for nearly everything. Mr. The Rock was Radinkan's cousin and guardian, and in his eyes he represented those 60% of the world that are necessary and disagreeable, and really annoying. Mr. The Rock would never, in his honest moments, have confessed to himself that he really hated Radinkan, though he might have been dimly aware that kicking him out for his good was a duty which he did not find particularly irksome. Radinkan hated him with a desperate sincerity which he was perfectly able to mask. Such few pleasures as he could contrive for himself gained an added relish from the likelihood that they would be displeasing to his guardian, and from the realm of his imagination he was locked out, an unclean thing, which should find no entrance. In the dull, cheerless garden, overlooked by so many windows that were ready to open with a message not to do this or that, or a reminder that medicines were due, he found little attraction. The few fruit trees that it contained were set jealously apart from his plucking, as though they were some rare specimens of their kind blooming in arid waste. It would probably have been difficult to find a market gardener who would have offered 10 shillings for their entire yearly produce. In a forgotten corner, however, almost hidden behind a dismal shrubbery, was a disused tool-shed of respectable proportions, and within its walls Radinkan found a haven, something that took on the varying aspects of a playroom and a cathedral. He had populated it with a legion of familiar phantoms, evoked partly from fragments of history and partly from his own brain, but it also boasted 2 inmates of flesh and blood. In one corner lived a ragged, plumaged Houdain hen, on which the boy lavished an affection that had scarcely another outlet. Further back in the gloom stood a large hutch, divided in 2 compartments, one of which was fronted with close iron bars. This was the abode of a large polecat ferret, which a friendly butcher boy had once smuggled, cage and all, into its present quarters, in exchange for a long-secreted hoard of small silver. Radinkan was dreadfully afraid of the lithe, sharp-fanged beast, but it was his most treasured possession. Its very presence in the tool-shed was a secret and fearful joy, to be kept scrupulously from the knowledge of the man, as he privately dubbed his cousin. And one day, out of heaven knows what material, he gave the beast a wonderful name, and from that moment it grew into a god in religion. The man indulged in religion once a week at the church nearby, and took Radinkan with him, but to him the church service was an alien rite in the house of Ramon. Every Thursday, in the dim and musty silence of the tool-shed, he worshipped with mystic and elaborate ceremonial before the wooden hutch where Shukri Vashtar, the great ferret, red flowers in their season and scarlet berries in the winter time were offered at his shrine, for he was a god who laid some special stress on the fierce, impatient side of things, as opposed to the man's religion, which, as far as Radinkan could observe, went to great lengths in the contrary direction. And on great festivals powdered nutmeg was strewn in front of his hutch, an important feature of the offering being the nutmeg had to be stolen. These festivals were of irregular occurrence, and were chiefly appointed to celebrate some passing event. On one occasion, when Mr. The Rock suffered from acute toothache for 3 days, Radinkan kept up the festival during the entire 3 days, and almost succeeded in persuading himself that Shukri Vashtar was personally responsible for the toothache. If the man had lasted for another day, the supply of nutmeg would have given out. The Houdain hen was never drawn into the cult of Shukri Vashtar. Radinkan had long ago settled that she was an Anabaptist. He did not pretend to have the remotest knowledge as to what an Anabaptist was, but he privately hoped it was dashing and not very respectable. Miss Derop was the ground plan on which he based and detested all respectability. After a while, Radicon's absorption in the tool shed began to attract the notice of his guardian. It is not good for him to be pottering down there in all weathers, she promptly decided. And at breakfast one morning, he announced that the Houdain hen had been sold and taken away overnight. With her short-sighted eyes, she peered at Radicon, waiting for an outbreak of rage and sorrow, which he was ready to rebuke with a flow of excellent percepts and seasoning. But Radicon said nothing. There was nothing to be said. Something, perhaps, in his white-set face gave him a momentary qualm, for at tea that afternoon there was toast on the table, a delicacy which he usually banned on the ground that it was bad for him, also because the making of it gave trouble, a deadly offense in the middle-class masculine eye. "I thought you liked toast," he exclaimed, with an injured air, observing that Radicon did not touch it. "Sometimes," said Radicon. In the shed that evening there was an innovation in the worship of the hutch god. Radicon had been wont to chant his praises. Tonight be asked a boon. "Do one thing for me, Shukri Vashtar." The thing was not specified. As Shukri Vashtar was a god, he must be supposed to know. And choking back a sob as he looked at the other empty corner, Radicon went back to the world he so hated. And every night, in the welcome darkness of his bedroom, and every evening in the dusk of the tool shed, Radicon's bittery litany went up. "Do one thing for me, Shukri Vashtar." Mr. the Rock noticed that the visits to the shed did not cease, and one day he made a further journey of the inspection. "What are you keeping in that locked hutch?" he asked. "I believe it's guinea pigs. I'll have them all cleared away." Radicon shut his lips tight, but Mr. the Rock ransacked his bedroom till he found the carefully hidden key, and forthwith marched down to the shed to complete his discovery. It was a cold afternoon, and Radicon had been hid to keep the house. From the furthest window of the dining room, the door of the shed could just be seen beyond the corner of the shrubbery, and there Radicon stationed himself. He saw the man enter, and then imagined him opening the door of the sacred hutch and peering down with his short-sighted eyes into the thick straw bed where his god lay hidden. Perhaps he would prod at the straw in his clumsy impatience, and Radicon fervently breathed his prayer for the last time. But he knew as he prayed he did not believe. He knew that the man would come out presently with the pursed smile he loathed so well on his face, and that in an hour or two the gardener would carry away his wonderful god, a god no longer, but a simple brown ferret in a hutch. And he knew that the man would triumph always as he triumphed now, and that he would grow ever more sickly under her pestering and domineering and superior wisdom, till one day nothing mattered much more with him, and the doctor would be proved right, and in the sting and misery of his defeat he began to chant loudly and defiantly the hymn of his threatened idol. Shukri Vashtar went forth. His thoughts were red thoughts, and his teeth were white. His enemies called for peace, but he brought them death. Shukri Vashtar, the beautiful. And then, of a sudden, he stopped his chanting and drew closer to the window pane. The door of the shed still stood ajar as it had been left, and the minutes were slipping by. They were long minutes, but they slipped by nevertheless. He watched the starlings running and flying in the little parties across the lawn. He counted them over and over again, with one eye always on that swinging door. A sour-faced maid came in to lay the table for tea, and still Radicon stood and waited and watched. Hope had crept by inches into his heart, and now a look of triumph began to blaze in his eyes that had only known the wistful patience of defeat. Under his breath, with a furtive exultation, he began once again a paean of victory and devastation. And presently his eyes were rewarded. Out through that doorway came a long, low, yellow and brown beast, with eyes a-blink at the waning daylight, and dark wet stains around the fur of jaws and throat. Radicon had dropped on his knees. The great polecat ferret made its way down to a small brook at the foot of the garden, drank for a moment, then crossed a little plank bridge and was lost to sight in the bushes. Such was the passing of Shukri Vashtar. "Tea is ready," said the sour-faced maid. "Where is the sire?" "He went down to the shed some time ago," said Radicon. And while the maid went to summon her sire to tea, Radicon fished a toasting fork out of the sideboard jar and proceeded to toast himself a piece of bread. And during the toasting of it, and the buttering of it, with much butter and the slow enjoyment of eating it, Radicon listened to the noises and silence which fell in quick spasms beyond the dining-room door. The loud, foolish screaming of the maid, the answering chorus of wondering ejaculations from the kitchen region, the scuttering footsteps and hurried embassies for outside help, and then, after a lull, the scared sobbings and the shuffling tread of those who bore a heavy burden into the house. "Whoever will break it to the poor child, I couldn't for the life of me," exclaimed a shrill voice, and while they debated the matter among themselves, Radicon made himself another piece of toast.